Welcome to our first of the 270 videos here in my class. I'm Dr. Mark Eckel. Glad to join you here today and glad for your participation in this class. It's an asynchronous class. I realize you all can take care of these things and watch these videos as your time permits. But what I wanted to do to begin class was actually to help us to understand how we should come to this kind of writing, and of course, like argumentative writing. What does it mean to make an argument? We're not talking about making an argument as much as we are emphasizing the process or the approach that we want to manifest in ourselves. And I thought it really important for us to begin with two important topics. One, humility. The second, charity. And for each of these, there will be 5 major applications that I want to suggest to us. And at the beginning of each of these, we'll define the words so that we all know what we're talking about and why they might be so important. The first one is about humility, obviously. Humility comes to us from a Latin word which means dirt, literally. It means the decomposition of dirt or plant matter. In fact, the concept of hummus, that thing that you might actually enjoy on some crackers, comes into play here, this decomposition of plant matter. Also the concept of, from Greek, this lowliness of mind. That's the idea that comes to us. And what I want to suggest to us in a class like this is that we shouldn't think that we're better than anybody else in our thinking about how we do our writing, that our proper regard should be for ourselves, sure, but also for others, and how we're communicating with them. So to the 5 principles. The first is, I think, important to begin any kind of course, and that is that humility should cause us to be teachable people. What I mean by that is that we ought to be listening to others. We ought to understand that there are people with whom we are disagreeing and that there are other human beings invested in this process. And through that, I think it's important that we recognize that we should be respectful of all folks, and that's should go without saying, but I think an important thing to say nonetheless in a course entitled Argumentative Writing. And then, of course, understanding that we all have much to learn. So humility teaches us that we should be teachable. The second important point is that humility is researchable. That is, we need to be careful about our facts. And I'm not talking about opinions here. I'm talking about factual evidence, and we're going to get into how to do research. That's really crucial. We should be wary of everybody's interpretation. As we'll learn later in the course, everybody's got an interpretation. You're interpreting my words right now in your own thoughtful processes and considering how those words might be understood by you as an individual. Then we need to be honest with all particular persuasions or perspectives. And I think that's really crucial, especially in a Twitter world. And we are not in a Twitter world in this particular class. We are not lobbing words at each other that make each other angry. We are actually being respectful of others. That's crucial. The third concept here is that of comparability. That is that we want to make sure that we compare and contrast consistently. And that's important because we understand that ideas have a broad spectrum. Ideas are not simply our own, or our group's ideas are not just the primary one, but we are often looking for common ground. So we want to make sure that we look for similarities and differences. And then, of course, we live in a progressive culture. That is, that there is a certain perspective and point of view that we hear most often in the culture around us. And the question then becomes, do I hear from anybody else? If I live in a progressive culture, have I invested any time in listening to intellectual conservatives, for instance? And those things and those folks and their ideas might be powerful and important to me as well. Compare and contrast, but finding similarities and differences. The fourth principle is that we ought to be affable. Now, by the way, from time to time, I'm going to be using words, and it might be helpful for you to look them up. I'm not going to always be defining them for you. In this case, I want to give the principalization behind them. That is that we ought to be considerate and gracious of other people. We ought to be careful to represent other people's perspectives in ways that they would agree with, I would often and quickly add, and that our word choice ought to be accurate so that you would want others to represent your beliefs well. Certainly you want to represent other people's beliefs well. That concept of being affable with others. And then number 5, Humility means that we are dedicated to service, and that means that we are intentionally writing so that our words might be usable and practical, and that our reading and writing and speaking and teaching is an assistance to others, not simply to get our point across, but in a way that is attractive to other people, that draws them in, that makes them want to participate in this argument, in this discussion that we are going to have in a collaborative understanding of ideas. Next up is charity. Make sure, however, that we always begin in all of our thinking with humility.